Today, we are opening a file on a case that, well, it really ripped through Canada's sense of security,
Absolutely.
revealing a monstrous secret hidden in plain sight and exposing decades of systemic failure.
Yeah.
We are diving deep into the life, crimes, and ultimate demise of Robert Pickton, the pig farmer.
This is such a devastating story, but also a crucial one. Our mission today is, I think, to move beyond just the sensational headlines
Right.
and really unpack the entire narrative. We're talking from the initial chilling pattern of disappearances in Vancouver
Mm-hmm.
through the shocking forensic investigation that followed, the complex legal aftermath, and even the, well, surprising circumstances of his death just recently in 2024.
It really feels like we're looking at a system that failed the most vulnerable people.
It did. And what happens when that failure is finally dragged into the light?
So we've drawn on extensive records for this. Trial transcripts, contemporary reporting about the inquiry, his final days. Grab your notes, let's unpack this horrific file. Okay, so to really understand how a serial killer could operate for so long, seemingly without consequence, you have to understand the community he targeted first.
That's essential context.
We begin in Vancouver's downtown east side, the DDS. This neighborhood was really the epicenter of this tragedy.
It absolutely was. And, it still is a community under immense socioeconomic pressure. The downtown east side is known for high rates of homelessness, addiction, poverty.
Right.
And for the women involved in survival sex work there, that vulnerability was just compounded. There was a lack of trust in authorities, the sheer precarity of their day-to-day existence. I mean, this environment basically provided the perfect hunting ground for someone like Pickton.
And the warning signs started tragically early, didn't they?
They really did. As early as 1978, you see this disturbing trend beginning. Lillian Jean O'Dare disappeared. Yeah, and she was just the start. Over the next 2 decades, dozens of women, mostly poor, often involved in sex work, and disproportionately Indigenous, they just vanished from the DTEs.
There must have been talk locally.
Oh, absolutely. There was rampant speculation, especially among locals and the outreach workers on the ground. They knew something was wrong, that a serial predator was likely active. But the broader institutional response, it was minimal, almost non-existent for a long time.
The idea of a killer operating right there in the city is terrifying enough, but the reality was even stranger, wasn't it? The predator wasn't hiding in some dark alley.
No.
He was 27 kilometers east, running a pig farm in Port Coquitlam.
Exactly. And this is where we introduce Robert Willie Pickton, born in 1949. That disconnect, between this quiet sort of rural setting and the urban horrors of the DTES, that's central to how he stayed hidden.
Camouflage.
Right. Pickton was raised right there on that sprawling family pig farm, 953 Dominion Avenue. And his background, I think, is key to his isolation. He failed grade 2, dropped out of school pretty early 1963, and he was apparently constantly isolated. He earned that infamous, really cruel nickname, Stinky Piggy, because people said he was often unwashed and just reeked of manure from the farm.
That detail, it's grim, but it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
About a man who was maybe psychologically marginalized, never really fitting in outside that farm.
Completely. And he went back to the farm full-time after his parents died in the late 1970s. He'd briefly worked as a meat cutter before that.
Which is just a chillingly specific skill set, given everything we know now.
Isn't it? And his connection to the DTS, it wasn't random tourism, it was routine.
How so?
Well, he regularly traveled into that area because the farm used a rendering plant there to dispose of animal waste.
Oh.
So this travel gave him intimate operational knowledge of the neighborhood, the routes, the schedules, and critically, who was most desperate, who was most available to be lured back to the farm.
With promises of money or drugs?
Exactly. Promises of money, drugs, maybe just company. He was preying on extreme vulnerability.
So this routine travel, combined with what sounds like systemic indifference from the authorities, that set the stage for years of unchecked crime.
It did.
And this brings us to what so many people point to as the biggest, most devastating missed opportunity in this whole saga.
Yeah.
The 1997 attempted murder charge.
Yeah. March 23rd, 1997. Pickton was charged with the attempted murder of a sex worker named Wendy Lynn Eistetter, and her account is just terrifying.
Can't happen.
She testified that during an altercation out at the farm, he had handcuffed her and stabbed her multiple times, 4 times, I believe. But somehow, Eistetter managed to escape.
She fought back.
She fought back hard, disarmed him, actually stabbed him with his own weapon, and managed to get herself to safety. Critically, both of them showed up at separate emergency rooms that night.
So the police had physical evidence of a confrontation. They had her
Had the
testimony.
stabbed victim, they had the suspect, they had the location, everything.
So how on earth did that charge not stick? Why was he released?
This is just a critical moment of institutional failure. In January 1998, the Crown prosecutors stayed the charge,
Stated. Meaning,
meaning they stopped pursuing the case. Their reasoning was that Eistetter, who admitted she had drug issues, was deemed too unstable, too unreliable for her testimony alone to guarantee a conviction.
they used her vulnerability against her.
Essentially, yes. Her marginalized status became the reason not to proceed. Legally, a stayed charge can theoretically be resumed later, but in this case, it meant a confessed, caught-in-the-act potential killer walked free.
It's just chilling to think how many lives might have been saved if the system had prioritized protecting her rather than worrying about conviction rates.
Absolutely, and that wasn't the only time warnings were ignored. It wasn't even close.
There are others.
Oh, yeah. The indifference was profound. An employee of Picton's salvage company, a guy named Bill Hiscox, he repeatedly told police he was finding things on the property. Identification counts, purses.
Belonging to missing women for the DTEs.
Exactly, belonging to missing women. Despite these really specific tips, police conducted 3 separate searches of the farm.
And found nothing.
Incredibly, found nothing substantial enough to proceed.
And then there was the freezer tip.
Yes. Even more alarming, years before the final arrest, back in June 1999, police received an anonymous tip, specifically stating that Picton had a freezer full of human flesh.
A freezer full of... That's horrifyingly specific.
It is, and that information, it was logged. But like all the other warnings, it seems it was entirely ignored. The institutional bias against these missing women had effectively become a shield for Picton. And if we connect this back to that whole idea of concealment, how he operated, what's truly bizarre is how Picton managed to hide these horrific activities behind this thriving, completely inappropriate social venue right there on his property.
Right, it wasn't just a pig farm. It was this weirdly successful, if totally bizarre, commercial operation in some ways. After their parents died, Robert and his younger brother David, they inherited the property. And they were actually quite savvy, weren't they? They sold off parts of that land to developers.
They did. Netted a significant sum, see $5.16 million.
$5 million. So this wasn't some impoverished, rundown operation struggling for cash. They had resources. But they lived in this, by all accounts, filthy, derelict environment themselves.
Yeah, the contrast is stark. And this environment was home to the notorious Piggy's Palace.
Gigi's Palace. Just the name.
It's perverse, isn't it? Knowing what we know now, this was basically an ad hoc nightclub set up inside a converted slaughterhouse on the farm property.
And the scale of this place. It's hard to wrap your head around. This wasn't just a few friends over.
Not at all. Events held at Piggy's Palace sometimes attracted crowds of up to 2,000 people.
2,000 people moving through a property where a serial killer was actively disposing of bodies. It's unbelievable.
And the clientele, that was part of the camouflage, too. It was completely eclectic. You had sort of rougher elements, including members of the Hells Angels Outlaw Motorcycle Club,
Okay.
mixing right alongside surprisingly prominent local political figures and business leaders.
Really? Politicians and business people went there.
Apparently so. That sheer number of people constantly coming and going meant Picton could easily filter people in and out of his own small trailer on the property without attracting undue attention. It made him seem like this quirky, maybe slightly dodgy, but well-connected local figure, not a predator hiding in plain sight.
The operation got so big it actually ran into legal trouble with the local government, didn't it?
It did, yeah. The Picton brothers were eventually sued by Port Coquitlam officials. They were violating zoning ordinances left, right, and center.
Because it was zoned for agriculture, not massive parties.
Exactly, strictly agriculture. But they were hosting these huge dances and concerts. It just shows their complete disregard for any kind of authority.
And their attempt to dodge these rules was, well, cynically brilliant in a way.
It really was. They tried to give the whole venue a veneer of legitimacy by registering a nonprofit charity with the Canadian government back in '96.
That charity, what was it called?
They called it the Piggy Palace Good Time Society.
You can't make this stuff up.
Truly. They claimed the society's purpose was to organize special events for worthy groups, basically trying to masquerade as some kind of benevolent community organization to get around zoning and liquor laws.
Did it work?
Not for long. Unsurprisingly, the status was revoked the following year when they failed to produce the required financial statements. The charity was disbanded. But that dual identity, the successful though legally dubious party organizers versus the grim isolation of the trailer and the slaughterhouse that was the perfect cover for years?
It just highlights this kind of incredible audacity. Running a known illegal nightclub, attracting thousands, while simultaneously committing and concealing dozens of murders right next door. It makes you wonder, were the authorities just too distracted by the noise to see what was really happening?
It certainly looks that way from the outside, doesn't it?
Okay.
Given all those warnings we talked about and just the sheer visibility of that farm and Piggy's Palace, it's still astonishing how long it took for anyone to finally connect the dots.
Right. And the actual discovery, when it finally happened, it wasn't even really about the missing women initially, was it? It was almost accidental.
Almost bureaucratic luck, yeah. The initial police raid in February 2002 wasn't looking for bodies.
So walk us through that initial entry. What were they looking for?
On February 6, 2002, the police executed a search warrant on the Picton property, but it was specifically targeting illegal firearms.
Okay, so guns.
Guns. Robert and David Picton were both initially arrested just on those weapons offenses. They weren't thinking missing persons at that exact moment.
But inside that environment, that search almost immediately pivoted, didn't it? From a standard weapons bust into something far, far worse.
It did. Very quickly. During that firearm search, officers found one single but absolutely crucial item.
What was it?
An inhaler. An asthma inhaler prescribed to Serena Abotsway.
And Serena Abotsway was?
She was a downtown Eastside sex worker who'd been reported missing over a year earlier. Finding that tangible connection, her personal medical device, belonging to a known missing person from the DTS, found right there on the farm that provided the critical legal link they needed.
In that discovery, that single inhaler, that's what opened the floodgates. That provided the justification for the massive escalation.
Absolutely. That immediately triggered a second, much broader warrant. This one allowed the police to search the farm specifically as part of the official BC Missing Women investigation. Finally, the true scale of the horror could start to be uncovered. The farm was sealed off by a joint RCMP Vancouver Police Department task force. Picton was rearrested on February 22, 2002, and this time charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Serena Abotsway, whose inhaler they found, and another missing woman, Mona Wilson.
And then the charges just kept mounting as the search progressed, right?
Yeah.
Reflecting the ongoing, and I imagine excruciating forensic investigation.
They escalated dramatically. They added 3 more counts, then a 6th, then a 7th. It kept going, eventually totaling 27 counts of first-degree murder by May 2005.
27.
And the investigation itself became one of the most expensive and exhaustive in Canadian history. It cost an estimated $70 million by the end of 2003.
$70 million.
Yeah, and the physical excavation, the digging, that continued for over a year.
$70 million spent uncovering a crime scene that potentially could have been stopped years earlier if they had just listened to one witness back in '97. It's staggering. The forensic work must have been an absolute nightmare.
Unparalleled, really. Eventually, the remains or DNA of 33 different women, all known to frequent the DTS, were found on that farm.
33 identified.
Identified, yes. But the forensic analysis was severely hampered by the nature of the place. The sheer volume of animal remains, organic matter, mud, junk. Finding human remains in that soup was incredibly difficult.
What were the theories about how the bodies were handled?
Well, they theorized that bodies might have been left out to decompose naturally, or possibly even eaten by the pigs themselves, which were roaming around the property.
Oh, God.
The task force had to employ these meticulous, almost industrial methods, using flat conveyor belts, large soil sifters, just methodically going through tons and tons of soil and debris, looking for tiny fragments, bone, teeth, any DNA traces.
And this brings us to the most grotesque elements of the case, really the methods of disposal he might have used.
Yes. The revelations about how Picton allegedly managed the bodies are profoundly disturbing. 2 primary claims emerged during the investigation, and both suggest just an unfathomable level of depravity.
What were they?
Okay, so one claim suggested Picton actually ground up human flesh and mixed it with the pork that he then sold to the public.
To people.
Sold it. This specific claim prompted an immediate public health warning from the provincial health authority. It caused widespread panic, understandably, that consumers might have unknowingly bought and even eaten human remains.
The idea that he might have turned his victims into a consumer product, it's just sickening beyond words.
It is. And the alternative theory was equally grim. the claim that he simply fed the bodies directly to his pigs.
Either way, the goal was obliteration of evidence.
Exactly, using the farm environment, the animals, the rendering process, using it all to erase the physical evidence, turning human beings into agricultural waste. This chilling disposal mechanism is why that forensic investigation took so long and was so incredibly difficult.
And didn't some crucial DNA evidence eventually link back to that 1997 attack, the one that was stayed?
Yes, absolutely. Remember Andrea Borhaven and Kara Ellis? DNA from both of them was later identified on clothes and rubber boots that Pickton was wearing during that pivotal 1997 assault on Wendy Lynn Eistetter.
So proof was there, hidden in plain sight, effectively, for years.
For years, while more women disappeared.
So before the trial even properly got underway, the world received this confirmation that the number of identified victims, those 33 sets of DNA, was potentially far, far less than the true count. And this came from Pickton himself, didn't it? In his own shocking words.
Yeah, what's fascinating, in a really dark way, is the sheer vanity involved in his confession. While he was in jail awaiting trial, they placed him with an undercover RCMP officer.
A classic cellmate sting.
Exactly, posing as just another detainee. And in what Pickton clearly thought was this moment of confidence, maybe bravado, he bragged to this supposed cellmate.
What did he say?
He bragged that he had killed a staggering total of 49 women.
49. Not the 27 he was charged with, not the 33 identified, 49.
49. And then, almost as an afterthought, he apparently lamented that he wouldn't get the chance to make it an even 50.
An even 50. It highlights, not remorse, obviously, but this warped sense of, I don't know, perverse professional failure, like it was a job unfinished.
It really confirms the motive seems to have been about accumulation, control, a numbers game for him, not just eliminating witnesses. So when the trial finally began in January 2006, the logistics immediately presented this near-impossible challenge. You've got 27 counts of first-degree murder.
How did the court even handle that? Trying a case that massive, both physically with the evidence and legally?
Well, the judge basically faced a practical impossibility. A single trial covering all 27 murders was estimated to potentially last up to 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah. And the risk of juror fatigue, errors creeping in, maybe even a mistrial after all that time and expense, it was just too high.
So what was the solution?
To manage that overwhelming scope, the judge used a legal procedure called charge severance, basically splitting the case.
How did they split it?
They divided the 27 charges into 2 groups. The trial proceeded only on the first 6 counts. These were chosen because they were considered the strongest cases forensically.
Just 6.
Just 6 initially. The remaining 21 charges were sort of set aside, reserved for a potential second trial later on. Though, as we'll see, that second trial never happened. Those charges were eventually stayed.
Okay, so the trial focused intensely on those first 6 confirmed victims. What kind of grim, unforgettable details came out during that process? What was presented to the jury?
Oh, the evidence was this bizarre mix of deeply technical forensic science and just grotesquely weird details. The jurors saw the forensic evidence linking 2 victims, Borhaven and Ellis, to those clothes and rubber boots Pickton wore back during the 1997 assault.
The evidence the Crown had dismissed years earlier.
The very same evidence. They also saw all the physical items seized from his dilapidated trailer, which really functioned as his operational base on the farm.
And that collection of items painted a truly disturbing picture of his predatory preparations, didn't it?
It really did. Probably the most infamous exhibit was that bizarre weapon assembly they found.
The gun.
Yeah, a loaded .22 caliber revolver, but with a dildo taped right over the barrel.
A dildo. Why?
Pickton actually tried to claim it was a makeshift silencer. An explanation the police experts quickly dismissed as, well, wholly impractical for a revolver. It made no sense ballistically.
Just bizarre and disturbing. What else?
They also found faux fur-lined handcuffs, night vision goggles.
Night vision goggles.
Yeah. A syringe containing some kind of unidentified blue liquid. The speculation was maybe a paralyzing agent. And a container of Spanish fly aphrodisiac. It all suggested premeditation, planning, maybe even ritualistic elements in his attacks.
And then there was the testimony from people who knew him, his associates.
Yeah.
That must have sealed the terrifying narrative.
Absolutely. Andrew Bellwood, an associate of Pickton's, testified that Pickton had explicitly discussed his methods with him.
What did he say Pickton told him?
Bellwood testified Pickton talked about killing sex workers by handcuffing and strangling them, then bleeding and gutting them, and finally feeding the remains to the pigs.
He admitted that to someone.
According to Bellwood's testimony, yes. In another instance, a different friend named Scott Chubb relayed an idea Pickton had apparently voiced about killing a female heroin addict by injecting her with windshield washer fluid.
Just pure sadism.
The totality of the evidence presented was really designed to illustrate this calculated pattern of extreme violence, specifically targeting the most vulnerable women from the DTS. Jurors also saw photos of victim Mona Wilson's partial remains found in a garbage can in the slaughterhouse.
After months of absorbing all of this horrific testimony and evidence, the jury finally delivered its verdict in December 2007. What was the specific finding?
Okay, so the jury found him not guilty of the 6 counts of first-degree murder.
Not guilty after all that.
Not guilty of first degree, which requires proof of planned and deliberate intent. However, they found him guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder.
Okay, second degree. What's the distinction there?
Second-degree murder still acknowledges intent to kill or intent to cause bodily harm that the person knows is likely to cause death. But it lacks that element of pre-planning required for a first-degree conviction.
In the sentence.
The sentence was the maximum possible under Canadian law for second-degree murder at that time. Life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years.
25 years before parole eligibility.
Right. And the women whose murder secured that conviction were Serena Abbotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Ann Wolfe, Georgina Papin, and Marnie Frey.
So Pickton gets the maximum sentence available for those 6 counts. But the legal battle wasn't over yet, was it? He appealed the conviction.
That's right. Which meant the victims' families were subjected to years more of legal uncertainty and, frankly, trauma.
He appealed all the way up.
He did. Pickton pursued appeals first to the British Columbia Court of Appeal and then ultimately to the Supreme Court of Canada. The constant reliving of the details, the waiting, it was immense pressure on the families. But all his appeals were ultimately dismissed. The Supreme Court of Canada finally affirmed his convictions in July 2010.
Okay, so the convictions for those 6 murders were final. But that finality then raised the massive question that was still hanging over the case. What about the other 21 murder charges? The ones that were set aside?
Right. What happens to those? Well, the Crown prosecutor formally stayed those remaining 21 murder charges in August 2010.
Stayed again. Just to be clear for the listener, what does stayed mean in this context?
Stayed charges mean the Crown essentially stops the legal process. They decided not to proceed to trial on those remaining 21 counts.
And the reasoning behind that?
The legal rationale was, well, cold, but technically sound from their perspective. Since Pickton was already serving the absolute maximum possible sentence under Canadian law at the time life, with 25 years before parole eligibility additional convictions, even if they were for first-degree murder on those other counts, could not legally increase his punishment. He was already maxed out.
So while legally sound, perhaps, that decision meant that the families of those other 21 women whose DNA was found on that farm, they never got a trial for their loved one. They never got a verdict. They never saw a formal legal conclusion to their specific case.
No.
That must have felt like a profound failure of social justice for them.
It was an agonizing anticlimax for many, certainly. It really solidified this notion that the system was perhaps prioritizing legal efficiency and hitting sentencing maximums over achieving comprehensive justice and closure for every single victim identified.
But the case, even with that ending, it forced this necessary, though incredibly painful national reckoning, didn't it? Not just about Pickton himself, but about the institutions that were supposed to protect people.
Absolutely. The central narrative shifted strongly towards the staggering, almost seemingly intentional neglect by law enforcement over the years.
And particularly the fact that so many of the identified victims were Indigenous women. That immediately connected Pickton's crimes to the wider, devastating crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada, the MMIWG crisis.
Exactly. The criticism became furious and sustained. Journalists, activists, victims' families, they were openly accusing the police of exhibiting profound institutional bias.
The argument being?
The argument was pretty simple and direct. Law enforcement had effectively ignored the disappearances for years because the victims were marginalized. They were sex workers, they were drug users, they were Indigenous. Crimes against them were treated as less important, less urgent. And that led directly to the dismissal of critical tips, like that 1997 attempted murder charge against Wendy Eistetter.
And this criticism eventually became impossible for the authorities to just ignore, right? The Vancouver Police Department was actually forced to issue a public apology.
They were. The deputy chief constable at the time, Doug Lepard, gave this quite sobering statement, formally apologizing for not catching Pickton sooner. He acknowledged the failures in those initial investigations.
But it went beyond just an apology, didn't it? There was an official inquiry.
Yes, and perhaps more significantly long-term, the BC provincial government was compelled to establish the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry. Its specific mandate was to investigate the conduct of both police forces involved, the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP, in relation to all those women disappearing from the DTS over the years.
What were some of the key takeaways from that commission? Did it confirm the systemic failures?
Oh, it absolutely did. The inquiry, which was led by Commissioner Wally Opal, confirmed that the systemic failures were widespread and deeply ingrained. It highlighted things like a critical lack of communication and coordination between the RCMP and the Vancouver police.
They weren't talking to each other effectively.
Not effectively, no. And it also noted that both forces seemed to prioritize other investigations, basically allocating minimal resources to the missing women case for years and years. The inquiry resulted in numerous recommendations aimed at reforming police procedures.
It says?
Focusing on ensuring that reports of any missing vulnerable persons are taken seriously immediately, irrespective of their lifestyle or background, and also improving the overall institutional relationship between police and marginalized communities. The whole process was painful, but it really cemented Pickton's case as this defining moment for Canada in formally recognizing the endemic nature of violence against MMIWG.
And Pickton himself, he continued to generate controversy even from behind bars, didn't he? Especially after he was transferred in 2018 to the maximum security Port Cartier institution way out in Quebec.
Yeah, his infamy sort of became this dark commodity. We saw that highly controversial attempt in 2016 to publish his supposed autobiography, Pickton, in his own words.
Right, I remember the outrage over that.
Massive outrage. People were furious that he might profit from his crimes. It forced the government to step in and ensure no money from it would ever go to him. And even just recently, the outrage over really tasteless merchandise, like those Pickton Farms t-shirts being sold online by some comedy troupe in 2024. It just showed that the toxic notoriety surrounding his crimes lingered right up until the very end.
So time, incredibly, just kept marching on. Despite the absolute horror of his crimes, despite the maximum sentence, February 2024 brought this technical possibility. Pickton, now 74 years old, actually became eligible to apply for day parole.
Yeah, that 25-year parole and eligibility period was up. Now, a hearing wasn't actually scheduled, but just the fact that he could apply stirred up immense renewed anguish for the victims' families.
That looming threat that even after all that time, this nightmare might somehow not be completely over.
Exactly. However, Pickton's life sentence was ultimately terminated, not by the parole board, but very abruptly, inside the prison walls, just a few months after that parole eligibility date hit.
Right. Can you detail the circumstances of that assault? It happened on May 19th, 2024.
It did. The attack occurred in the comm room area of his unit at the maximum security Port Cartier institution. It was around 5:14 p.m., apparently during the routine distribution of medication.
And the assailant?
His assailant was another inmate, Martin Charest. He apparently had a documented history of violence against other prisoners already. The attack itself was described as sudden and very targeted.
And the weapon used was almost unbelievably mundane, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Common prison contraband.
It was depressingly simple. The subsequent investigation revealed that Charest just grabbed a standard cleaning broomstick that was accessible on the range. He snapped the handle.
Broke it.
Yeah, and used the sharp, broken wooden end like a spear, shoving it into Pickton's face and upper body.
Were guards able to intervene?
Correctional officers did intervene extremely quickly, apparently subduing Charest within minutes. But the damage was already done. It was critical.
Pickton was severely injured then.
Critically injured. He was immediately airlifted from the remote prison location to a hospital, first in Septels, then transferred to a larger hospital in Quebec City where he was placed on life support.
But he didn't recover.
No. He lingered for 12 days before finally succumbing to his injuries. Robert Pickton officially died on May 34, 2024, at the age of 74.
And his death in custody automatically triggered an internal review, right, by the Correctional Service of Canada.
Yes, that's mandatory. It's called a National Board of Investigation, or BOI.
So a man whose horrific crimes were arguably enabled by systemic security lapses out in the community ends up being killed partly due to security lapses inside a maximum security prison.
What did that BOI actually reveal about the state of security at Port Cartier?
Well, the findings, which came out in 2025, highlighted what you could only call a profound and deeply ironic systemic security failure. The BOI noted that inmates in that unit routinely had free access to cleaning items, like brooms and mops.
things that could easily be turned into weapons. Exactly. And this access was apparently due to a failure in really basic procedure. The lack of functional locking cabinets that were supposed to be used to store these items securely on the range, they just weren't being locked properly or weren't functional.
So the tools were just available.
Pretty much. The report recommended immediate corrective measures, fixing the storeroom doors, implementing strict inventory controls for cleaning tools, basic stuff, really. But the irony is just inescapable. A lifetime of impunity enabled by systemic failure out there ends via a preventable security oversight in here.
And what happened to the assailant, Martin Charest? What was the judicial outcome for him?
Charest was charged with first-degree murder in July 2025, but crucially, during his legal proceedings, Charest later pleaded guilty. And he made a statement, didn't he?
He did. He stated explicitly that he committed the act for the victims.
Yeah. His statement provided this dramatic, albeit completely illegal, form of vigilante closure to a case that had resisted any kind of neat formal closure for decades. So this deep dive, we've traced the confirmed facts as best we can. The 49 women Pickton bragged about killing in that cell, the 33 women whose DNA was actually identified on the property, and the 6 second-degree murder convictions he ultimately received. His death now closes that final personal chapter. But the case itself, it remains this massive scar on Canada's judicial system, on the social landscape. It's not going away.
No, absolutely not. And his legacy, it feels like it's defined less by his own individual brutality, as horrific as it was, and more by the response to it, or the lack of response for so long.
I think that's right.
The case permanently altered how Canada addresses, or at least talks about addressing, the catastrophic issue of violence against vulnerable and missing persons, particularly Indigenous women. It forced systems, however reluctantly, to confront these really deep-seated biases.
And you see the pattern right to the end. We saw this police department eventually apologize for the profound flaws that contributed to the huge delay in his arrest. And then, decades later, the very system of maximum security incarceration that held him failed in a basic security measure which enabled his death.
It leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. When the victims of mass violence are drawn almost exclusively from the most marginalized, the most vulnerable segments of society, and when institutional failure is clearly a major factor enabling that violence, which is ultimately the harder barrier to break down. Is it the evil actions of one disturbed individual, or is it the ingrained societal indifference that provides them safe harbor for so long?